guys, I thought I'd do a quick tutorial on olive skin tones and some skin tone combinations. So just to note on what I'm using, I've recently bought these little sort of pots. These are they came a little bit too big. I would probably go for like half the size, but there are 5 of them which are stackable. So this is just like ceramic pots. And one thing that's useful I'm finding here and why I got these for skin tones is because with skin tones, often there's a lot of variation between how much water you add. And one thing I do a lot is I mix an insufficient amount of a certain color. So this is a good way, I have found, simply to force myself to limit the colors that I'm making and to make enough of them beforehand. But you can obviously work with a palette. And the other challenge here is I find the more limited your range of tones that you're mixing from, the better. So you know, start with a limited amount of colors. At the very end, with local value, you can add in or mix. But it's good to really kind of limit your palette. For this recipe, I'm starting with a master recipe. So this is basically where I'm mixing together some colors and then adding water. You don't have to do this. This is just a bit easier, like teaching in terms of instructions, to say this is what I've done first and this is how I've added it. But it's completely fine so long as you're limiting your red, yellow, and blue values. You're not, using like 3 different types of blue, like phthalo blue, cerulean blue, whatever. As long as that's limited, you can really just match to skin tone the colors and come up with maybe 4 main ones that you're working with. The lightest skin tone here is 95% of the master recipe of 85% raw sienna and 15% cerulean blue. This is about 90% of the master and 10% cadmium red. This is about 60% master, 10% cadmium red, 3% sepia, 45% master, 45% sepia, 10% cerulean blue for this graying tone. So this is the greenish tone that you kind of see in olive skin tones. The challenge that I find with olive skin tones is just avoiding making them too green and having that sort of sickly cast. So a lot of balance, part of that is balance. And also just, putting them out beforehand, you'll probably notice that your paints are drying lighter than what you put down. It's good to kind of do this beforehand. And finally, lastly, just to point out, there is a real lack of consistency amongst watercolor colors. So what I've put down here might look completely different if you're just following this recipe with your own colors. That has to do with the pigment quality of what you're using or even the type of pigment used. So I would say more, if you want to do this, match these little swatches or match swatches that you found in the skin rather than just trying to rely only on formulas like this. And I thought we'd mix in a little bit about facial features here by working with facial features. So we're gonna do a nose here. And let me get up my reference. Okay, so I'll put the reference to the side, but for noses, you're gonna be doing this very, very lightly. I would recommend starting on this one with the ball of the nose. Gonna move up a little bit so that we've got the eyebrow notch. Now we can intersect with nostril 1. So one thing to remember is that skin tone, when it has color, is brown. So different varieties of brown. You can create browns essentially by mixing all the primary colors together, so red, yellow, and blue in different degrees. The more blue in your mixture, the cooler the color, the more sort of greenish. And the more reds, the ruddier the color. So what we have in olive skin tones, as with most skin tones, is a balance between red and green. So you might see that balance like in a paler skin tone as between, say, orange and blue or orange and purple. It just depends sort of what the primary color of the skin tone you're describing is. And another thing finally to note when you're doing your portraits is that often our ideas of skin color are really far off. When you get straight down to it, there's a lot of room for misconception when it comes to looking at skin tones, because what we're actually looking at when we're looking at skin is something that's very reflective. So it's reflecting its surroundings, it's interacting with light. You're rarely going to simply be describing someone's tone of skin under, let's say, just like a flat daylight light. There's going to be a lot of factors that are interfering. So the colors that you think are in there aren't necessarily going to be there. Okay, so I'm going to start with my lightest color, which I've mixed out a quantity here. I've put down H2O1, so this is the highest water level, the most water, and the palest color. So I'm just going to come down and I'm going to preserve my highlight at all costs. The highlight is on the base of the nose. And the reason why I'm not going straight in with these other colors side by side, which you absolutely can do, so you don't have to put down a base layer of the lightest tone first, is simply so that when I'm working with this on the page, I have a reference. So I have color down that I can kind of bounce off other colors while I add them and have a consistent value as I'm working. Visually, I find this is easier to do than just kind of winging it and putting colors side by side as they occur. You'll also note that I'm not exactly matching the skin tone of the reference I'm using, so I'm putting together recipes. I honestly find it's easiest sometimes, especially I found in the beginning, instead of trying to match your colors necessarily to the reference that you're using, start by using a few formulas and applying them based on what you know about kind of how the light is working and generalities. Okay, so now I'm going to come in with my cooling color, which has cerulean blue in it. And I'm actually going to just get some pure cerulean blue out here to use on this side of the nose where there's a little bit of reflected light. So your cooling color is good for, I'm just calling it that, a cooling color, because that's what it does. Sometimes this is known as a grain value. But this is something you can use in areas where the skin is not necessarily darker or way more in the shade, but it's on a darker side for the lighter value. So that's what I'm seeing on this side of the nose. I'm just going to come in with cerulean. Okay, now I'm going to move in with that mixed together color that's a bit more green for the underside of the nose. And a little bit of that more red value for the side of the nose where the color's sort of warming up. And since there's a bit more warmth as I move towards the highlight area of the nose, actually let me just first get a little bit of this red value around here. 1 second. bit more of that green value in the inner corner of the eye. I'm going to come in now and add just a bit of that raw sienna to my more reddish tone and dilute it a little bit to get the warmth of the skin as we move towards the highlight. Okay, and I'm going to come in with a little bit of that kind of greenish value on this side of the nose. One thing you'll find with watercolors and portraiture is that the contrast between really dark areas and really defined areas, like with really sharp edges, and really fluid areas with lighter paint is what creates a lot of the luminosity. So having some areas with really subtle variations of watery color and then areas where you have kind of sharper color values goes a long way in creating something that has a sense of luminosity and lifelikeness. Pick up a little bit of the color on this side of the nostril. Oops, okay, maybe that's a bit too much. And let me come in with that darkest color, so the it's got a bit of sepia in it for the nostril. One thing to note about cerulean blue is that it kind of has, and I'm not quite sure how this color is made, but it has kind of a chalky, lighter value in it, almost as if some white has been added. So you might have to find a darker sort of blue. I'm not doing that, but like ultramarine, if you want to cool down some of the darker areas without having the lightness of the cerulean blue alter the final color of your paint. And I'm just gonna do the filtrum and then I'll move on because I want to cover a number of different potential combinations for all of skin tones. So the addition of green goes a long way in kind of creating the olive sense in this skin tone. Paradoxically, you'll find in a lot of olive skin tones that there's actually a lot of red that you're seeing. And that, the sort of contrast with the green, creates this kind of illusion of more of a greened, nice olive kind of color. Right, let's do another demo. Okay, so for this next one, which is a lighter olive color, I wanted to start exploring the use of sap green. Now, sap green can create some really beautiful brown colors. So the benefit of working with something where instead of you mixing together your ultramarine and cadmium red to get a green, but rather buying sap green, is that you can create a nice, really pure kind of brownish color if you mix it with red. So I wanted to experiment with that with this one. The lightest color is going to be a mix of sap green and cadmium red. Then I've got yellow ochre and raw sienna mixed using kind of a muddy brush from this. So, having muddy pots can actually be useful when it's consistent because you get variation in color. And then you can see that the skin tone gradually moves towards a more purpley kind of alizarin crimson, where I'm going to, for a more brown value here, I'm not going to use this too much, but I will come in on kind of a spot by spot basis later with alizarin crimson, ultramarine, and sap green to create variation. So let's see how this goes. So I'm just going to quickly sketch out the side of the face. So I'm not using the best watercolor paper. I'm going to use a wet on wet technique here, which is not going to work that great with this paper because it's not very high quality, but it would be the best way to get a subtle variation in skin tone like we have here. And the key, of course, will be not to make her look too green. So I'm just going to map out the eyebrows. And for the eyebrows, I'll probably end up creating a purple for them. You could come in with black, but I advise against using black in almost all cases because it's sort of, once you put that down, you can't go back. It does have a tendency to muddy your colors. So usually I'll stick with a very dark purple rather than black until I'm putting in just the very, very, very darkest details. Okay, and I'm just gonna move down so we can get the side of her nose here. And I'm just gonna mark the beginning of her smile. Okay, so let's try this out. So my first layer, I'm just gonna wet down. I'm actually going to do an entire layer of the whole thing with this very dilute mix, and then I'm going to brush in with a paper towel to pick up the paint so that we get the lighter area on our cheeks while still maintaining a gradual flow. If you're wondering why I'm going over the eye, the thing is that the whites of the eye are going to be reflecting all of the colors of the face. So actually, it'll save you some trouble later on if instead of just, kind of maintaining this idea of eye whites, you just come in with this color and then build up. So I'm gonna come in with paper towel. And looking at my color here, I would say I probably should have tended a little bit more towards the sap green side. I was a bit cautious in putting in too much of that cadmium red. So this color isn't as luminous as I would like, and I know the sap green could make it just a little bit more bright, but I wanted to be really cautious so that I didn't, get kind of that zombie sort of sense. So coming in, picking up the highlights. And I'm just going to soften the edges. wait to soften the edges until this dries just a little bit. Or I'll come in with kind of a damp brush, just moving along the sides with like a very, very, very lightly wet brush to make these highlights a bit more fluid. And now I'm going to come in with that raw sienna yellow ochre mix. So just bearing in mind that this does have a bit of that sap green mixture into it in trace amounts. And I'm going to see if I can get a nice sort of glow along the side of the face. Just going to mix in a little bit more of that sap green to get some variation coming down here. All right, and now I'm going to get the underside of the eye. So this is warm, and then you can kind of see as we move towards the nose, the color shifts from something that's more green in the shadows to something that's more purple in the shadows. And because this is watercolor, sometimes having just a little bit of unreality, so a little bit of exaggeration in the clarity of these colors, where instead of, just going straight to brown, you actually allow some of these colors to clear through. Sometimes that can be effective. So let's see what happens if I start to mix in a little bit of alizarin crimson and ultramarine as we move towards the inner corners of the eyes. And the useful thing about having all of these colors is that they all mix together to form brown. It's just your purple mixtures where we've got that purple and that sap green are going to be, depending on what kind of purple you use, a little bit more ruddy, a little bit warmer, and then where the blue dominates or the sap green dominates, it's going to be a little bit cooler. And I'm just placing colors side by side so that they blend into one another. Squinting your eyes is really helpful. That's one thing I found when I'm working with colors, that lots of just squinting to kind of make some of these details come into focus is useful, because skin is really subtle, and the beautiful thing about skin is this, just the variation. So the fact that it's so reflective and so liquid that you can have all of these colors existing side by side, but it's also the challenge because we tend not to notice these variations when we're just going about our day-to-day life. Some people have a really good grasp of skin color and seem to get it immediately, but otherwise I find that I always, or more commonly, misjudge something about the skin color. So this variation comes into key when I allow myself to just almost, you know, it's almost like breaking with the part of your brain that's saying, no, you know, that should be more red colored, and actually seeing what you're looking at. Okay, and here is where we can start to see the limits of using low GSM paper, where, you know, it's not blending perfectly, but I do actually like this, this color combination and the way that it's starting to flow across the face. Just gonna come in and see what a little bit of ultramarine added to that sap green does for this space here. Yeah, ultramarine is one of my favorite colors to add because it can create some really lovely luminous contrasts. All right, and now the challenge here, the thing that's going to show whether this works or whether we just keep reading this as what it looks like right now, a green face, is whether when we put in the eyebrow and to the eye details, this starts to look like skin. So skin is really based on everything that surrounds it. I'm going to actually use some black in this, so I'm gonna make kind of a purpley black for the eyelashes and some of the details of the face, because the duller color of the black will set off some of the luminosity within the skin color. So give me a moment while I find out where that is. I'm not going to go straight in with a black color. Again, I'm going to be very cautious with this. The reason I'm adding black, the way to think about this is it's less because I want to create a darker color. That's, I think, one mistaken thing if you think that black is going to give you a darker color. Black will give you a more dull color in watercolors, and sometimes that's a good thing, like in this instance when you want to kind of flatten the color. But if you want to go dark instead, I would recommend using something like indigo or purple for that, just because that doesn't run the risk of dulling. So I would recommend thinking of black in the context of watercolors as a tool for dulling down colors, not so much making colors darker. So let me just hair dry this, and sorry, this is going to be loud. For the eye white, eye whites I find are fascinating just because they show how much we don't, just all of these peculiarities in the way that we perceive color. So the whites of the eyes are actually often a dark greenish gray if we're actually looking at the color. And what I'm doing on my phone now is I'm just like taking a screenshot of the white of her eye, just because I know that my perception here is biased, where my brain is going to want to make that well, basically, if I didn't sort of know that the whites of the eye were going to be this greenish color, it's not something that I would have intuited. So if I hadn't kind of done a bunch of portraits where I've looked really closely at the eyes, I would just see this as white, and this color is going to kind of make or break some elements of this painting. Also, with eyes, you want to remember that the eye whites still have volume. So you don't just have, you know, a couple highlights on your eyes and call it a day. You're going to have volume throughout. So you're going to have the eye whites getting darker closer to the sides as they recede, and then kind of lighter in the middle. Highlights are going to come across them, and often there's also going to be a shadow created by the eyelashes over the eye. So I'm going to come in here with a shadow, and I really should have protected my highlights a bit better here. I did not. That would have been the difference, but I'll do what I can now. So I should have just protected like these little highlights to begin with in the eyes. I didn't, so there's not much I can do at this point, but that's fine. And I'm going to move in with more of that crimson color for the inner corner of the eye. For the crease on the eye, I'm going to be using crimson and ultramarine, so that's going to be purple. Oops, okay, I did not allow the paper to dry enough there, so this is going to not be as sharp as I want, but that's fine. And I'm just going to warm this up with a little bit of that yellow ochre as we move towards the crease, towards one side of the eye. Also, let's get some of this crimson for the underside of the eye, and a little bit here. And I'm going to move on to the eyebrows. So that's alizarin crimson, ultramarine, and a little bit of black. When painting the eyebrows, you want to think about if they have darker eyebrows, where is the hair kind of at its thickest. You can start there, and then think of volume rather than individual hairs. It's important here also to just, when we're seeing kind of darker color here, contrast it with the lightness of the skin. This is going to blue a little bit, so I'm adding ultramarine to this while blending out the eyebrows. So what we're seeing is actually just a cooling of the color. She doesn't have just block eyebrows. I don't want to, you know, have to do each individual eyebrow here, but I do want this idea of volume to continue. So that's why I'm kind of creating that variation. And let's get in some hair. I'm doing all of this just, you know, so that I can wait for the eye to dry a little bit so I don't have to hair dry quite as much. So I'm being really generous with the ultramarine mixed with this, and I'm not just, you know, black is rarely black when you look at it. So there's going to be variation in this color. I'm just starting with the cooler color, and I can come in with more sort of details when this dries. And I'll quickly hair dry and then move into the eye. Okay, so I'm going to mix eye is kind of like a very dark purple, purpley brown. So I'll add some red to a purple mix. So using all of this kind of muddy color that I've got on my palette already, I'm just mixing together a very dark purpley red value. Then I'm going to get some of this purple for the eyelashes. Always want to be really cautious with eyelashes. Put in a little bit, a few strands of hair just to throw off that contrast with the skin tone. And I can see now I want to warm up the under eye area a bit, and then I'm going to leave it here. But as you can see, all of a sudden, from a bunch of seemingly unrelated colors, we get something that feels like a skin tone. I have to be really careful with adding this yellow ochre because it'll make the skin look more green if I overdo it. Okay, I think I'll leave that there, and let's do just one more. Okay, so one more doing dark olive skin, and this time I'm going to do a base layer in purple, so ultramarine and crimson, and then just use washes of burnt sienna and yellow ochre. Okay, so we'll start off just with the side of the face. And the useful thing about this sort of technique where you do an underpainting is that you can just focus on value in one layer and then focus on colors in subsequent layers. Okay, so I'll start with a wash of yellow ochre. And I'm going to do more yellow ochre on the front plane of her face and then transition to burnt sienna on the side of her face facing away from the light. And for a grain color, so to make things more dull, I can just come back in with a little bit of that sap green. Or you could use ultramarine for this. I'm going to mix some blue into, some ultramarine blue into that purple mix for the hair. Highlights. And now for details like the eyebrows or on the chin, I'm going to check this is dry, and then I'm going to just mix in some yellow ochre to my purple, which will create a dark brown. I'm just going to simplify the jawline here a bit. Adding in a little bit more ultramarine for the hair. Okay, and now moving back to that brown mixture where I've mixed pretty much all the colors I've been working with all together. get the upper lip. So just, and I'm gonna come in with some Potter's Pink just for a bit of local value on the lips. And I'm just going to make the background a bit sharper because it'll make the face, some of these details which have kind of, the paint's kind of bled into the wrong areas. I'm just going to define the outer corner of the face a little bit more. All right, so I hope this was helpful in creating olive skin tones. The thing to remember is that you don't need particular paints to do any of this. It's useful for skin tones in general to have colors like burnt sienna, yellow ochre, raw umber, burnt umber if you have them. But the general principle to work with is this. Skin tone will pretty much always have some brown in it somewhere. Even in the lightest tones, there will usually be a little speck of color muddying up whatever color you think that you're putting down. You can create browns by mixing together red, yellow, and blue, so the basic colors. And from person to person, it's really an issue of either tending towards more of a red value, more of a green value, or a darker value, in which case you can use more concentrated paints. But at the end of the day, it's organization that's going to create the effect of a watercolor portrait that feels realistic more than necessarily getting skin tones at exactly the depth that they are in your reference. Anyway, hope this helps. Okay, thanks for watching.